I was born in 1996, so I've lived in a deeply toxicated, that's not a word, a deeply toxic world my whole life. And I also am extremely grateful for my life. And it's been full of a lot of beauty.
Bienvenidos a Volver al Futuro Podcast, donde platicamos con las mentes que nos impulsan a crear el nuevo paradigma de salud y bienestar, conducido por Víctor Sadia.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today we have Claire de Laszlo. Claire Marshall is a digital marketing strategist and filmmaker based in Brooklyn. These days she has been mending clothes, rearranging apartments, witnessing the phases of the moon, reading about the origins of our industrialized world, and taking care of friends. Claire produces the CancerTalks Podcast and is currently working on a short film about the spiritual origins of settler colonialism. This conversation marks the first time someone rejected one or two questions that I posed, and while initially felt weird, I am now very grateful that it happened that way. You know, I have been thinking a lot about the intersection of art, creativity, and healing, and how we need to make space for things to transform. So choosing silence instead of words makes space for other voices to be heard, and also space for the world we long for to arrive on its own terms. Claire, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I wanted to talk to you on this podcast for a long time. I truly appreciate how you take care of your words, and I love your insightful, patient, and very sweet voice. You've talked to me about your spiritual desire to heal the world. And I don't know if I have that the same way, but I feel so alive near people like you that can say that about themselves. Can you tell me more about this desire?
It's interesting to start here because since we met, I've, as I guess any 26-year-old does, I've undergone a lot of different revolutions and reorientations to identifying as a healer, and recently remembering how much I love writing, and also having had some sort of traumatic and transformative experiences in my efforts to be a healer in my community, and sometimes feeling like, oh, maybe this isn't the whole story about what I'm here to do. Maybe I'll just say that for now.
What traumatic events would you like to share that have been part of that journey?
Well, what I feel ready to share that goes way back to when I was 12. I was enjoying that question in your interview preparation guide, because I don't think I've really told that story very much, but when I was 12, I had 2 health issues that were undiagnosable and sort of minor, but they really, they gave me this perspective that I went on to realize was not mainstream, and that a lot of people didn't seem to have access to, or only came to much later in life, for example, around a cancer diagnosis. But my 2 health experiences were having these inflammatory responses where I'd have hives and skin issues, and sometimes I would just get sick, and I had a little bit of asthma. And so it was histamine response, but the allergist is IgG, not IgE. So I don't know if people are familiar. There are 2 different types of histamine response, and mine is what's called sensitivity instead of allergy. So but I was picking tomatoes in my mom's garden, and my hands were covered in hives. And I had had skin issues for the past, since I was very little, as well as some asthma symptoms. And I just looked at my hands, and I ran into the house, and I said, Mom, I think I know what my skin issue is. So I cut tomatoes out, and then I was 12, but I did, on my old Mac, I did some computer research and found that they were part of the nightshade family, and some people have inflammatory reactions to that. So I cut it out just as a 12-year-old. I just stopped eating nightshades. Nobody had ever heard of this. And I called it an allergy because otherwise people would dismiss it, But we tried multiple allergists to get medical confirmation, and they never did until I was 22. I had to wait 10 years before a doctor. I found a naturopath, wonderful naturopath, Dr. Holder in Northern California, gave me a panel that confirmed what I had learned about myself. And the other one was similar, where I fractured my spine, the third lumbar. I was a ballerina as a kid, and ballet, I have a lot of things to say about ballet, but it did teach me a very deep awareness of how my muscles work and how my body recovers, because it's so strenuous. So that was a similar experience of going to these physical therapists and feeling, even as a kid, like they didn't know my body as well as I did. They would give me these exercises, and I knew, I would be like, no, that one's not good for me. It makes me imbalanced, or that one's not good for me. I'm not flexible in that way. Yeah, so those two really shaped my way of interacting with the medical system to date. And it's only really in working with CancerTalks that I realized that was unusual, and also that there are a lot of people who've had similar experiences and are trying to come together.
Yeah. What do you have to say about ballet? Because I sense that it's similar to what I have to say about soccer.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, when I'm feeling flip, I walk around saying that it's a fascist art form. But I don't know how you feel about soccer. But yeah, it's an art form that's built for one specific body type. And so I grew up in this conflicted studio where they were very body positive, but the things that we're asked to do actually are only physically possible on one body type, which is not my own body type. So it's very disorienting to be asking people to do these things that their bodies are not made for, unless they're, plucked from the crowd by like the Russian ballet teachers. Like some people can do these things, but not everyone. So that was very, it was almost like I felt gaslit, they're telling me like anybody can do ballet. And I reached a ceiling when I was 17. It was clear that I just couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think that there are many similarities also, but I think that playing soccer, it's also very stressful, and that the coaches are really not coaches, life coaches or health coaches. They just want to win. So the method to make you a good player sometimes is a bit fascist and a bit really putting you to fight with your own teammates, in a sense, which is not the best thing. Yeah,
especially for kids, it's terrible.
So yeah, I have many great stories, but also a few traumas, because when you don't achieve what you would like to achieve or what you're seeing in the TV, then you can leave, as I did, as if you're a failure, just because you weren't from the main team and you were from the secondary team, and that really ingrained in me a belief about who I was. And I still, in a sense, struggle and dream about it very often. Yeah.
To your question of some formative traumas, health traumas, when I quit ballet, I developed an eating disorder almost immediately. And I've thought about that in a lot of different ways. It went on for like 10 years from the point I quit ballet until very recently. Or maybe not 6 years. And that was interesting because people often assume that ballerinas have eating disorders. I didn't have an eating disorder while I was dancing, but I think, and I didn't think of this until this moment, but I think it was a way of dealing with unprocessed grief. Like that was what I thought of when you said, still thinking about it and having these aspirations that just sort of hit a wall. And especially, spending your young life working so hard towards something that then sort of evaporates. yeah, I didn't have a context for that grief because I was also a bit relieved because I've reached that ceiling where I couldn't do what they were asking me to do. And yeah, and I was relieved to be able to read and write more. I went to get a liberal arts degree when a lot of the people I was dancing with, went to conservatory. And I was so happy to have more time for um, thinking and socializing and building relationships outside of the dance world. But yeah, there was definitely deep loss that I didn't acknowledge, maybe until this moment. I did,
Yeah,
yeah, I certainly processed and moved through my eating disorder, but I think I just made that connection that I went to for me, it was binging and restricting
yeah.
um, pattern.
I think
Yeah,
I'm making the same connection that I didn't have a grieving process because I also quit very abruptly, and which I was in a sense relieved because, yeah, but at the same time I didn't grieve that loss. And
yeah,
in not only the loss of what you had worked so hard for so long, but also for the unfulfilled dreams
yeah,
that you thought they could come to pass, but they didn't.
yeah,
So we also have to dream. We also have to grieve uh, about the dreams that we once had.
definitely.
Why did you choose to study anthropology?
I followed people I loved. I was uh, at my school, I went to Wesleyan, which is in Connecticut, and they let you wait until you picked a major. You were supposed to pick your second year, and I I didn't pick until my third year, um, which somehow I got away with. And I really just I actually wanted to make my own major, which was an option, but it required this constant proving yourself that I'd seen some friends go through, and I let go of that dream because it was just going to be too much paperwork basically, and I just wanted to read. Um, so I followed anthropology because of two professors, Anu Sharma and Professor Gina Ulisse, who are amazing. They both are like anti-colonial anthropologists. Anu Sharma is Pakistani and Gina Ulisse is Haitian. And yeah, they just had this very sort of anti-anthropology way of looking at ethnography. Yeah.
Yeah, two of my best teachers also in at NYU were anthropologists.
Mm-hmm.
One was teaching about media theory, and the other one was teaching about garbage. And I think it was amazing
Cool.
for me to see that so many worlds open up when you are studying garbage, for example, and that humanity can be read through many lenses, even by what they discard, or potentially, especially from what they discard.
Yeah.
And in a
Who's
sense,
that
I think
professor?
Robin Nagel.
Cool.
She worked at the sanitation department in New York as a truck driver,
Yeah. Cool.
and she was the dean of the program where I was studying at NYU. It was really life changing, and you know what? In a sense, you and I came to the cancer world not because of a personal experience or or a family member or something, and it's amazing how. Again, cancer, it's also an anthropology. It's also a way of opening um, signs and signifiers and ethnographies and the way that we can read life through the lens of cancer or through the many lenses of cancer. So I would love to hear that anthropology way of thinking about cancer, which in a sense, it's also a way of thinking and talking about life.
Yeah. Um, Wait, can you repeat the question?
Yes, what ways of questioning reality as an anthropologist
Mm.
um, apply to the world of cancer and to the world that you've discovered since opening up so many narratives around cancer?
There's so many different answers to this question. I guess I'm thinking about something my recent guest on Cancer Talks, Wyatt Pickner, shared that I've heard in other places, which is that a lot of First Nations people in the US talk about cancer, or say that cancer arrived only after colonization. And there are a lot of different cancer histories in the world, and I don't know, maybe they all have a bit of truth to them, but I certainly think of cancer as exacerbated by industrial pollution and just the toxic world that we live in. So yeah, so one way to look at cancer would be like through sort of environmental histories. And then one of our favorite things to reference is Zach Bush's at a conference that he was at, Cancer Talks conference in 2018. He said isolation is the meta disease, which you probably have heard. So that's another piece, is thinking about how people ended up in these bubbles, how the Western world ended up with isolation so normalized. And then, yeah, another feels more spiritual. What do I want to say about that? For me, spiritual things are always hard to talk about, especially when I know there's a public audience, because that's kind of like the only thing that to me is private. I'm an open book, but when it comes to the spiritual, it's like, words don't always suffice. But yeah.
Why do you think that happens, that talking about spirituality or our own spirituality feels odd when there's an audience?
Well, I feel protective and precious about, like, I'm a very spiritual person, but I don't follow a specific religion, and and it's still like, yeah, how I would want to articulate God, or whatever you want to call it, feels like this constant unfolding and discovery, that it feels more like a choice. Like I could decide, I could pull some words out of the air and sort of describe, for example, how cancer is a spiritual issue, but it's precious to me because it's energy. And if you just tell, the world of Apple Podcasts, all these people I don't know, I don't know that they'll receive it the way that I mean it,
Thank you. Tell me about your mending practice, and how did you came to this community, and what do you do, and why do you do it?
Mm-hmm. So from ballet, I have always sewn, and my mom taught me to sew, but pretty quickly I knew more about it than I was just excited by it. She's a woodworker and phenomenal with her hands, but not so much with cloth, and I'm the opposite. What's kind of hard for me. Yeah, so she taught me to sew. My great-grandmother was an amazing seamstress, but I never met her. But I have her sewing machine. So I learned to sew on her sewing machine, and I always sewed my ribbons onto my point shoes. And I didn't think about it much, but like in high school, I would get something and I wouldn't like how it would fit, and I would just alter it to fit me better. And I realized that not everybody knew how to sew. Eventually, I realized it was unusual that I actually knew how to sew.
I don't even know how to hold a needle.
Yeah, right? Most people don't sew. Even most women, it's like in a Western context, it's a feminized skill, but most women I know don't sew either. And I know for my grandmother's generation, that was sort of a feminist choice. It's like, we want to spend time, reading or whatever we want on our careers, and so we're going to buy store-bought clothes. Anyway, so this was just something I did and didn't think very much of until the Christmas Eve, the first year of lockdown. I couldn't visit my family. It was just me and my girlfriend in New York, and we were sad. We kept, like, up until very close to Christmas, we were wondering whether we were going to just risk it and wear masks and go to our families anyway. So we just were putting off how we wanted to celebrate the solstice again and again. And then it was Christmas Eve, and I just decided I was going to sew stockings. And I took apart an old dress, and I hadn't made very many things from scratch, but I just made stockings, and then they were there, and I was like, oh, I guess I know how to sew. I was like, and not just I know how to sew, but I really enjoyed that feeling of making something. And I've always had just been, I guess, from like a high school sort of like frustrated, why is everybody so wasteful? Why is there, learning about like the garbage island and all these kind of like introductory environmentalist things. I would read like Gary Snyder and Michael Pollan, and I was like very, admittedly, very white, sort of narrow-minded environmentalist, but a very serious environmentalist in high school. Yeah, so I'd always had this resourcefulness, and I haven't bought any new clothes in 10 years. I go to thrift stores, but I don't buy new clothes. And remembering how much I love to sew, I just started doing it a lot. And I just told my friends, like, it was also a little bit of research. So I just started asking people, do you have things with holes? And then, yes. And then, well, what do you do when something has a hole? And someone would say, I throw it away. And I'm like, what do you mean? Do you throw it away, or do you donate it? Or what, or you give it to somebody? And some people are like, no, I literally throw it in the garbage. Some people give it away, some people, but nobody fixed their clothes. And mend, I like the word mend better. Yeah. That's the beginning of my mending practice.
How has it, what happened with it? Because there's so much in it, and I guess that it generates its own field that attracts not only conversations and ideas, but people who, I'm very attracted to the idea, because as I said, I don't even know where to buy needles.
Yeah.
But mending, and what do you think about when you're mending, and what do you talk about when you're mending, and how that it's really a mirror or of what we're doing here, or potentially we can consciously be doing here while we are alive.
Yeah. Yeah, I love this question. I think about so many things. There's one way, it depends on what I'm mending, what I think about. So for example, I've been working for the longest time, maybe I'll send you a photo of this, on a dress that was my mother's maternity dress when I was in the womb. And I found it in her closet in college when I'd come out recently, but then I'd also had my heart broken by a girl, and I was so frustrated at how I would still get a lot of attention from men, but I felt like I couldn't, like, this girl had dumped me. And so it felt really important to dress in a way where men wouldn't give me attention. And so it's this sack dress, like it's just totally shapeless. And I would wear on top of it a turtleneck underneath. So it's like no skin, high neck, and a shapeless dress. And I felt powerful in this dress. And then I wore it to shreds. So I stopped wearing it because it was falling apart. And I've been in this mending practice for 3 years now. But this dress was just sitting on the shelf, like tattered. And I brought it to a woman who's doing a dissertation at Bard on mending, Kate, I'm forgetting her last name. And I told her I'd kind of given up, and she's, you have to mend it. No, it's so special, like, and you have to mend it so you can wear it again. And I was like, you're right, but I still didn't know what to do. Anyway, so now I've created a lining for it, and I'm doing a Sashiko inspired stitch to reinforce it. I'll send a picture, but with something like that, I think about that whole story. I think about my mom, and it's made of flax linen. So there's a whole story there too. Flax is the oldest material used for cloth, apart from hides, but the oldest woven fiber. And is not very common today, but we made that fabric before long before machinery, hand spinning. And there was a time, at least in European history, where 40% of a family's crop would be growing fiber to make clothes, which I find so crazy. Everybody was growing their clothes on their own land. So that's some examples of things I think about when I'm mending.
We've talked about also the book Undrowned, about Black feminism and marine mammals. And now you mentioned that you were reading a lot of white environmentalists. So tell me about how feminism, Black feminism, is really giving us new vocabulary, new languages to understand ourselves. And how do you apply those to not to confront the existing narrative, but to mend it, but to work with it, but to grieve it, and potentially develop something new? I don't know.
I think I'm sort of going to reject this question as such. I don't want to be the one to answer what Black feminism is doing for our ways of thinking, but I will say that Undrowned by Alexis Talling-Gumbs is an amazing book, and everyone should read it. And maybe just a general invitation to, if you haven't read any Black feminism, look it up and read it and listen.
Great. When we were talking about the book, you said that, living in New York, you're often working to shed the narrative that you need to focus on me or get what's yours in order to be happy and fulfilled, or even to be creative.
Mm-hmm.
But your creativity seems to be emerging out of a gifting, and not really separating or trying to be better than, but just creating with. How do you think about creativity, and in this sense, how it can really change the way we even talk about disease as a creative with?
I love that question. Well, I think it's actually multiple questions. Well, I want to talk about gifting. I've been interested in gift economies for a long time. My thesis was about Guelaguetza, which is, for those who don't know, a big festival. In contemporary times, it's mostly a gigantic folk dance festival in Oaxaca City. And then they have smaller ones, Guelaguetza Popular, in different villages. But Guelaguetza is an indigenous word that refers to gift economy. And resource sharing. My thesis was about the relationship between Guelaguetza as this tourist attraction, basically, and the origins of gift economy, and then also the way that, especially around 2006 and the anti-NAFTA uprisings in Oaxaca with the Zapatista movement, there were a lot of Guelaguetza Popular that rose up that were kind of trying to bring Guelaguetza back to its roots as this moment of community coming together. Again, I feel like I'm getting old enough that you realize all these threads that happen where you were really excited about something and then kind of moved on, forgot about it, and then years later you start doing something else. You think it's new, and then you tell your mom or something, and she's like, "Oh, that's exactly what you were doing 10 years ago." And you're like, "Oh yeah." Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, notice the beginnings of threads. But so your question about creativity and a non-individualistic creativity. For me, that's related. And ever since then, and then, I mean, in the context of COVID, the rise of mutual aid groups was amazing. Because, I mean, another, like a sort of synonym for it says ayuda mutua, which is literally mutual aid. So that's been an exciting, I think of my mending practice as mutual aid practice, which is to say, there are a few components. I don't buy materials, so I never pay for them. They just like arrive because, like you said, nobody knows how to sew. So if somebody has like their grandmother's sewing box in their house and they hear that I actually sew, they just give it to me. I have all these materials that come out of nowhere, which also, I'm also obsessed with garbage. So I love that my media is garbage. Anyway, so I don't buy anything. Nothing I use is new. And I also don't accept money for anything. I love to mend things for other people, but for me, it's a conversation, and which means I want you there. It's not like a tailor. You can't just drop your thing off and then I'll return it fixed. I want to be with you and have you try it on, and then we do something and try it on again and see if it's working. And I think there's more on this question of creativity, but
I think that New York City is so contradictory. It has everything, and it's interesting how you live in New York, right?
Yeah, in Brooklyn.
In Brooklyn, so I think it's you can find, like, I just remember that Cheryl describes herself as the alley cat. And you can find so many different kinds of cats that can really connect in New York. It's really amazing. And how the academic world, which is so, I think, I wouldn't say advanced, but so intellectually advanced in terms of the amount of reflection, research, knowledge, philosophy that's really there.
Yeah.
You can use a lot of that intellectual frameworks to read the city and its inhabitants from so many perspectives, that every single practice, I guess that in the city, what I'm trying to say is that for us, that we have been really studying and reading, we love, I don't know if we love it, but we use the philosophy to explain the things that we do.
Yeah.
But at the same time, even if we forget about those things are, let's begin again. New York is so full of contradiction that it's easy to feel New York reminds you that we are all contradictory. That's what I want to say, in a sense.
Yeah.
And how can you really embody that contradiction without the need to flee from it, as our parents and our schools taught us to do since the beginning?
I love this question. And it's the opposite of the theme I'm exploring in those short essays about LA. To me, I mean, whatever, it's kind of annoying when people make coastal generalizations, but my experience of Los Angeles is a place that makes you forget the contradictions. My experience of New York is a place where it's impossible to forget the contradictions. There's some exceptions if you're living in some really fancy apartment and, I don't know, you take a taxi everywhere. But for most people living in New York, the state of the industrialized world, the state of climate chaos, the state of toxicity, pollution, unhealth, wealth inequality, everything, racism, obviously, is so in your face. Yeah.
I want to talk about you as a podcast host. Um, it's funny. I always do research on the people I want to invite for the podcast, listening to the interviews they give. But
Oh
now I
yeah.
did research by listening to you as an interviewer.
Yeah, right.
You are very courageous. You listen and you don't feel compelled to answer just to fill the void with
Mm,
space and sound and meaning. There was one specific episode when a person said, I'm going to die, in those words. And you held that space in silence and in
mm,
celebration. And at the same time, you also found the words to continue the conversation after that um, ultimatum, in a sense.
mm.
How it's, what do you think about podcast interviewing, and how can we um, get give more depth to these conversations that at the same time are so public,
Mm-hmm.
but they're what makes us want to listen to them is because they don't feel public.
Yeah, no, there's a personal conversational thing. Yeah, podcasting is interesting, and I didn't seek it out. I was working on Cheryl Buck's website, and we just had a good working relationship. She wanted to have this conversation about cancer, but she didn't know what platform. I had never made a podcast before, but I just suggested it. She wanted to change the conversation. Um, so I sort of walked into it, and it's a really loving, this is usually how I describe it. It's a loving work environment, which is what has kept me there. And then there's a lot of amazing things that have unfolded. But yeah, I stumbled into the podcast world. So I'm just now starting to think about what I like about it and what I think of it as a form. Um, and I do love that. Like, I listen to most podcasts when I'm folding laundry, sweeping, like doing domestic labor, really. And so my favorite podcasts are ones where I feel like company. Um, there's this thing I like to say that if I had a band, it would be a goofy track title, which is "Clean the Kitchen with Me," is kind of like a mantra that I have. I'm always trying to like invite friends into domestic labor, like sharing that kind of work with community. Um, so I like that about podcasts, is they can be company. Um, and I think it's also a really nice way to, even before podcasts were as popular, um, especially with like singers and actors who I really respected, I would go to YouTube and like watch I love long form interviews. Um, and I was thinking this morning actually about this amazing, because it's sort of a documentary or a special on Eartha Kitt, who's an American singer. And she just has this amazing relationship with her garden. And then she also teaches movement to this group of kids in a gym. And she was like, had a huge, explosive singing career earlier in her life, and then just sort of retreated to work in the garden. So I love like finding company of people I might never get to meet in real life, but yeah. So I guess as an interviewer, I probably try to, maybe not so consciously, but I try to reflect that feeling, being good company.
I like that approach because it doesn't require that you deliver a message, that you educate, that you spread a word or marketing. Is just keeping company, and probably that's the underlying current under Cancer Talks.
Mm-hmm,
The
definitely.
talk themselves, the conversation itself, it doesn't have, it has a lot of purposes and a lot of resonance with a lot of things, but probably the company is what, what generates this gravitation field of
Yeah,
healing and
right. Being
working
together,
together.
and whatever's the opposite of isolation. Yeah, community.
Yeah, yeah. Although that word keeps keeps coming back, but at the same time, it's in a sense a bit shallow and
It's been co-opted a
yeah,
lot.
co-opted a
Yeah.
lot. Yeah. So tell me about nonprofits. What do you think about NGOs and all this world? nonprofits, and where do you think we should take it? Because that world is not going anywhere, and I guess that's a good that those are good news, but still they need reinvention and criticism.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I believe that no company should be for profit. That's like a baseline. Don't know if we'll ever get there. Probably humanity will destroy itself before we abandon capitalism. But yeah, nonprofit itself, like the financial structure that is not a radical idea. I don't think it's just a commitment to not accumulate wealth, right? I mean, people like I pay rent and get my groceries by working for a nonprofit, right? So it's not like everyone's volunteering or anything. It's just sort of like how I think a business structure should be. Then there's the other side of how nonprofits have been used to wield political power. And that is devastating. I'm also pretty much an anti-interventionist. I think, especially in the context of the United States, we should leave the world alone. And although that is not something that the US has done in the history of the US. But yeah, that my main issue with nonprofits is the way that they work with the World Bank and the IMF. In the example of corn, giving Monsanto seed to farmers so they can, quote unquote, like start their own business and whatever, make a living, but those seeds are GMO and those seeds cause drought. And then we start another nonprofit because there's no water in the village, and so we need to build a well, and like, look at these poor people, they have no water. And the whole beginning is that we went in there and tried to impose capitalism. So yeah, it's just a terrible cycle of cover-ups. Then there's other nonprofits that are, there's so many amazing nonprofits in my neighborhood in Brooklyn that are technically incorporated, but they're basically just anarchist mutual aid organizations. So almost nonprofit means nothing by itself, but those are some thoughts about what nonprofit can be used to do.
Yes, thank you for bringing that into our attention, because we tend to see nonprofits just as the good guys, but we don't see them as part of the same machinery and the same narrative, which is not to say that they're bad, but it reinforces the way things are, and maintains the status, as you say. So thank you so much for sharing those thoughts. I see your back wall with several colors of paint. Are you designing which color to paint your wall, or what's
I'm
that?
actually in my dear friend Jameson's room because the acoustics are better in here. So I asked if I could record the podcast. We live down the block, and yeah, I've been helping him decide what color to paint his room now.
Good. Good. I like the orange.
Yeah, it's nice.
All right, Claire. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for making us think and feel. And I don't know if you want to share or say anything else. This is your space.
I do. Give me 1 second. I guess to close, because wellness is a word that you work with about or on your podcast. I think a lot of my journey of the past few years in trying to engage in community healing in many different ways, especially in very personal relationships of mine and Cancer Talks as well. I think I'm ready to be totally done with the concept of wellness, returning to awareness that we live in an extremely polluted world, and I think there are ways to take care of each other without needing to or expecting to arrive at a place that is quote unquote healthy. I think that in the industrialized world, we're past the point of, I don't think we can really return, you know? I mean, like thinking about even down to like the water system and the microplastics in our water, or like chemical runoff that we can't see but is causing like immune diseases, you know. I don't think we will have what we understand as a healthy world ever again. But that doesn't give me a sense of despair, actually. I think there's so many ways to be connected with each other and be connected with our ecosystems, even in that context. You know, I was born in 1996, so I've lived in a deeply toxicated, that's not a word, a deeply toxic world my whole life. And I also am extremely grateful for my life, and it's been full of a lot of beauty. So yeah, maybe an invitation to lean into care and connectedness and try to enjoy that process, regardless of how quote unquote healthy anybody is, or what the test results say, or if you have time to pursue a big career, or if you have to take time off and you're not making any money. It's like this is our reality, and even within that context there's room for care and connection.
Thank you. I do believe, I don't know how to articulate it or to even embody it, but I do believe that we need more celebration. We need more laughs and more dance and more laughter. Yeah. to embody that possibility.
Yeah. I've been really trying to have more fun. Very seriously focused on having more fun. And also, I'll say it because I've been doing it. It's changed my past few weeks. Try to wake up with the sunrise. Like I live in Bushwick in Brooklyn, like really urban. And waking up with the sunrise makes me feel connected to my ecosystem in a way that nothing else can.
I love it. We have that every day, and we take it for granted.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your authenticity. Thank you for rejecting a few questions. Thank you for choosing not to answer others, not because you don't want to, but because you feel that it aligns more with what you believe you are. And I think that's beautiful to say in a public space. And although it gives us some intrigue on what you're thinking or in doing, at the same time, it reminds us that we all deserve our own opacity.
Yeah.
And that our cultivating our own values without having to express those is probably even more important. Even when we want to connect and we want to show ourselves as vulnerable, it's very valuable. Thank you for doing it. And well, have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, Claire.
You're welcome.
I'm still recording, but
okay, cool.
Yeah, I just marked the end of the episode. Thank you so much.
Great. That's a good idea. Yeah, I always I always regret that I ever stopped recording, because sometimes there's really good gems when people are saying goodbye and they continue the thought, and like, oh,
that's exactly what I do.
Yeah.
I lost so many that I said I'll just keep recording.
Yeah.
And most of the time we don't show it, but sometimes we do, because the tone changes and we relax the shoulders and we even use curse words. And so it also shows that the podcast it's inauthentic in a sense. It's a performance.
Totally.
Yeah, this is too, but we're not supposed to publish this part, so we feel we put another mask. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I like where you chose to end in the context of podcasts in particular. I think remembering that we always have the autonomy and we can make decisions to withhold, where the illusion of the podcast and I think also like sort of the culture of podcast, TikTok vloggers, is like put everything private on display. And so I think, withholding is very powerful.
Yes, thank you so much. And it also shows the dance we had to agree to do this podcast. And I think and that's beautiful. That's beautiful because we're not pursuing anything more than connecting. Sometimes people just accept to be on your show because they want the exposure, and that's the transaction. That's okay. Right. But this conversation was definitely not because of that. And I love that we are reflecting on why we would choose to be interviewed or not. And you showed me that, so thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm thinking of putting this into the show, though.
Yeah, go ahead.
We'll have to see.
All yours.
It's like the end of the Devil's Advocate movie, where the devil at the end, it says vanity is his favorite sin. Like, devil is always there. But yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, dear Claire.
Yeah, really nice to talk. We'll be in touch.
We'll be in touch. Have a good day.
Okay, bye.
Nos encantaría recibir tu retroalimentación de estos podcasts para continuar generando contenidos que te sean útiles e interesantes. Si puedes, déjanos un comentario en la página web victorsaadia.com.